Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales that we're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments, so let's begin. Keaton Monroe had built his life from nothing, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. But as he stood in the doorway of his own home, everything shattered in an instant. He had spent years being the provider, the rock, the man who never faltered. Long nights, endless deadlines, and the kind of devotion that only a fool would give without question. And now, that fool had walked into a nightmare. The moment Keaton pushed open the bedroom door, he didn't need words. The truth was tangled in the sheets. Melissa, his wife of 17 years, was curled beneath another man, her golden hair spilling over the pillow like some warped vision of a love story gone wrong. And the man? Tyler Corbin, his best friend. No, his ex-best friend. They turned, their expressions soaked in arrogance rather than shame. Tyler smirked, his inked arm wrapped possessively around Melissa's waist. Keaton, Melissa finally spoke, voice unsettlingly calm, like she was commenting on the weather, not wrecking her marriage. Say something. But Keaton didn't speak. He calculated. The rage, the heartbreak, it was cold. Not fire, but ice. Then a sound behind him, a backpack hitting the floor. He turned, and there stood Sandra, his daughter. Her expression wasn't shock or sorrow. It was contempt. "Why don't you just disappear, Dad?" Sandra spat, her words sharper than any blade. And in that moment, something inside Keaton snapped. Not with rage, not with fury, but with purpose. They thought they had won. They had no idea who they had just betrayed. Keaton didn't react. He didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't fall to his knees like some broken man. Instead, he looked at his wife, his best friend, and the daughter he had spent his life protecting, and saw strangers. "You need to understand, Keaton," Melissa said, slipping out of bed, wrapping the sheets around her body like it was some shield against the truth. "You're not in control anymore." Tyler chuckled, slipping into his jeans, his muscles flexing as if he was marking his territory in a house that wasn't his. "Yeah, man, just let it go." Sandra crossed her arms. "Uncle Tyler is more of a dad than you ever were." That should have hurt, but it didn't, because Keaton Monroe had already stopped feeling anything for them. Without a word, he turned, walking down the hall to the guest bedroom. He pulled out a suitcase, his movements precise, methodical, eerily calm. Behind him, Melissa leaned against the doorway, watching him pack with an air of detached amusement. "That's it. No fight. No begging me to stay," she taunted. Keaton zipped up the suitcase. "Enjoy your new reality," he said, voice like steel wrapped in ice. "You'll regret it." Melissa's smirk faltered. They all thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Keaton didn't go to a bar, didn't call a lawyer first, didn't drown himself in sorrow. He got to work. The apartment he rented that night was small, sterile, lifeless, but it had everything he needed: a desk, a laptop, a notebook, and silence. That silence, it became his war room. He mapped out every asset, every investment, every financial thread that Melissa had her claws in. The house, in his name. The car, his name. The investments, his name. Melissa had spent the last 17 years spending his money while he was too busy earning it. Now, he was taking it back. By morning, he had already closed their joint accounts, transferred assets, and cut every financial vein she relied on. They hadn't noticed yet, but they would. And when they did, it would be too late. It took 3 days before Melissa realized what had happened. The first sign, her credit card declined at a grocery store. The second, Sandra's college fund was gone. The third, the mortgage bill arrived, with only Keaton's name on it. The text started slow. "Melissa, where's our money?" Sandra, "Dad, what the hell? Mom can't buy groceries." Tyler, "Yo, man, this ain't funny." Keaton ignored them. Then the call started. Then the voicemails. By the fourth day, there were 37 missed calls, 43 texts, and 22 voicemails. The final voicemail, Melissa was screaming. "You son of a b***tch. You think you can just take everything from me? I'll ruin you. I'll." Keaton saved the voicemail. It would make good evidence in court. On the fifth day, Keaton went home. Not inside, just to watch. Tyler's truck was still parked in the driveway like he owned the place. The lights were on. Laughter spilled through the windows. They thought they had won. They thought he had lost. Keaton smirked. Phase 2 begins now. Keaton knew Tyler was a parasite. But he also knew something else. Tyler wasn't just sleeping with Melissa. He was sleeping with multiple women. Keaton hacked into Tyler's email, his social media, everything. It was insultingly easy. And what he found? Gold. Screenshots of explicit messages to at least 4 different women. Bank statements showing gambling debts. A pawn shop receipt for the luxury watch Tyler had bragged about buying new. Keaton compiled all of it. Then he created a new email, a fake account, and sent the evidence directly to Melissa. And then, he waited. 3 hours later, his phone rang. "Melissa, I know it's you," she spat. "I know you sent those emails." Keaton took a sip of his coffee. "Interesting perspective. You destroyed our finances, our lives. I only reclaimed what was mine," he interrupted smoothly. "Speaking of which, how's Tyler doing? Still around? Or did the photos change that?" Silence. "You're lying," she whispered. Keaton chuckled. "Am I? You know how to be certain, don't you? Just check his phone while he's asleep." Melissa's breath hitched. "You should probably get tested, by the way," Keaton added. "Who knows where he's been?" He ended the call before she could answer. That night, he drove past the house again. The windows were lit, and the screaming had begun. The next morning, Keaton parked across the street and watched. The front door burst open. Tyler stumbled out, clutching a duffel bag. Melissa stood in the doorway, rage twisting her face. "You lied to me," she shrieked. Tyler's face was pure desperation. "Baby, it's not what it looks like. I saw the messages. You piece of trash." Keaton smirked. Checkmate. Tyler threw his bag into his truck, face burning with humiliation. "You think Keaton did this?" he shouted. "He's the one laughing right now." Melissa hurled a shoe at him. "Get out of my house." Tyler's jaw clenched. "Your house." He barked out a laugh. "This is Keaton's house. He's going to kick you out next." Melissa's face drained of color. She hadn't thought about that. Not until now. As Tyler peeled out of the driveway, his tires screeching, Keaton leaned back in his car, watching. Phase 1. Complete. Phase 2. About to begin. Melissa was next. Melissa Monroe had never worked a day in her life. At least, not in the way that mattered. For 17 years, she played the role of the perfect suburban wife, hosting wine nights with her equally entitled friends, showing off the luxuries Keaton provided, and pretending she had built a life when, in truth, she had merely lived off his sacrifices. And now, she was standing in the wreckage of her own making. Keaton watched from across the street as Melissa sat on the porch steps, barefoot and broken, gripping her phone like it held the key to salvation. Her fingers trembled as she tried to call someone. Tyler, maybe? Her friends? Anyone. But she already knew. The moment Keaton had cut her off, they had to. Money was the glue that held her world together. And without it, that world crumbled. The first real consequence arrived later that evening. Keaton had received confirmation from the mortgage lender. The house was now entirely in his name, and he had revoked Melissa's access to all accounts tied to the property. She was, in every legal sense, now nothing more than a tenant in his home. And tenants? They could be evicted. The morning after Tyler's humiliating exit, Melissa stormed into the bank, demanding answers. "I don't understand," she hissed at the branch manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who had known Keaton for years. "Why are my accounts frozen? Why can't I access my own money?" Patricia glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Monroe, all the accounts in question are under Mr. Keaton Monroe's name. You were listed as a secondary party, not an owner." Melissa's eyes widened in horror. "That can't be right. I've been using those accounts for years." "You've been spending from them for years," Patricia corrected gently, "but you never owned them." Melissa staggered back like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "Your mortgage, credit lines, vehicle payments, they all belonged to Keaton." Melissa felt sick. She thought she had won. She thought she had humiliated him, pushed him out, left him with nothing. But the truth was so much worse. He hadn't lost. He had planned this. Sandra Monroe had grown up entitled, spoiled, ungrateful. And why wouldn't she be? Keaton had given her everything. He worked tirelessly so she could have the best clothes, the newest phone, the safest car. But she never saw that. She only saw what she felt was missing. The birthdays he missed because of work, the late nights at the office, The weekends he spent building their future instead of playing daddy-daughter picnics in the park. So, when Tyler and Melissa whispered poison in her ear, she believed them. She had thrown away the only man who had ever truly loved her. And now, she was paying the price. Harvard's deposit deadline had passed. Her dream school, the one her father had spent nearly 2 decades saving for, was gone. And now, she was left with nothing. She had tried calling Keaton dozens of times, but he never answered. Until one night, standing in the cold outside his apartment, her face pale and desperate, she saw his car pull into the parking lot. "Dad," she called, running toward him, her breath visible in the crisp air. Keaton stepped out, expression unreadable. "How did you find me?" he asked, voice devoid of warmth. "Mom had the address from court documents," she admitted, hugging herself for warmth. Keaton said nothing. Sandra swallowed her pride. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I was wrong. I get it now." Keaton tilted his head. "Get what?" Sandra's voice cracked. "How much you did for us. How hard you worked. And how we—" She took a sharp breath. "How I treated you." Keaton's silence stretched like an executioner's pause. "Dad," she pleaded, stepping closer. "I need you." Keaton let out a slow exhale. Once, those words would have undone him. Once, he would have moved mountains for his daughter. But that man was gone. "You made your decision," he said, his voice steady and cold. "Now live with it." And he walked past her, leaving her standing alone in the dark. Melissa had tried everything. She had begged. She had cried. She had even tried charming her way back into Keaton's life. But when none of that worked, she tried threats. "You can't just cut us off like this," she shrieked one night outside his apartment door. "I'll take you for everything in the divorce." Keaton simply sipped his coffee and closed the door in her face. The next day, she tried to hire a lawyer, only to discover that Keaton had already retained the top 3 attorneys in the city, ensuring that none of them could take her case. One by one, her options ran dry. Until, finally, the court ruling came in. Her divorce settlement, the bare minimum. She had thrown away a man who had given her everything. And now, she was left with nothing. Keaton drove past his former home one last time. The for sale sign had been replaced with sold. Melissa and Sandra had already moved into her sister's garage apartment, living in a single-room space with barely any privacy. Sandra was now working a part-time job at a fast food restaurant, her former friends avoiding her like a plague. And Melissa? She was invisible to the socialites who once praised her. She had reached out to old acquaintances, old lovers, old friends, and all of them had done exactly what she had done to Keaton. They had discarded her. Keaton felt nothing as he watched another family move into what was once his home, because he had already built something better. 6 months later, Keaton Monroe was untouchable. He had been promoted, leading a new engineering division at a top firm. He had moved into a high-rise condo, overlooking the city with a view fit for a king. And most importantly, he had moved on. Ivanka Palmer sat across from him at dinner, her auburn hair catching the glow of the candlelight. "So," she said, swirling her wine, "are you finally done looking over your shoulder?" Keaton thought about it. Thought about Melissa, alone and aging. Thought about Sandra, learning how cruel the world could be. Thought about Tyler, working under the Arizona sun, a broken man with no future. And for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled. "Yeah," he said, lifting his glass. "I'm done." And he had won. Melissa Monroe had once been the queen of a suburban castle. Now, she was nothing more than a washed-up relic, living in her sister's cramped garage apartment, scraping by on the last shreds of her dignity. She had gone from sipping wine with her wealthy friends to searching job listings on an outdated laptop, from bragging about designer brands to cutting coupons for groceries, from hosting dinner parties to working a dead-end job as a receptionist in a rundown insurance office. Melissa Monroe had finally come to understand something terrifying. She wasn't special. She had never built anything of her own. She had merely taken from Keaton, taken from Tyler, taken from the world. And now, there was nothing left to take. Sandra Monroe had always been the girl who had everything. She had spent her teenage years flaunting her privilege, mocking those beneath her, rolling her eyes whenever her father asked her to be responsible. And now, she was working the late shift at a fast food restaurant, forced to take orders from kids she once considered beneath her. Every shift felt like an exercise in humiliation. Her old friends? Nowhere to be seen. Harvard. A dream that would never be. Her future? Uncertain. She had thought that choosing Tyler over her father was the right move. Now, she realized too late that she had burned the only bridge that mattered. And no matter how many times she tried to call Keaton, he never picked up. Because Keaton Monroe was no longer her father. She had made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. One cold evening, Keaton's phone rang again. The caller ID? Blocked. But he already knew who it was. Against his better judgment, he answered. A small, fragile voice whispered, "Keaton, please don't hang up." "Melissa." Keaton leaned back in his chair, listening to the desperation in her tone. She swallowed, struggling to keep her composure. I need to see you." Keaton's voice was like steel wrapped in ice. "Why?" Melissa hesitated. "Because I miss you." He let out a slow, humorless chuckle. "Miss me?" he repeated, his voice dripping with cold amusement. "Or miss what I gave you?" Melissa inhaled sharply. "Keaton, please." No. He cut her off. Melissa's breath hitched. "But I don't have anyone else." Keaton didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "That was your choice," he said simply. And then he hung up. For good. 6 months had passed since Keaton had walked away. 6 months since he had dismantled their lives piece by piece. Now, standing outside what was once his home, he watched as the final chapter closed. A new family was moving in. A young couple with bright eyes and hopeful dreams. They had no idea what had happened in that house. No idea of the betrayal, the heartbreak, the revenge. And as Keaton watched them unpack boxes and laugh together, he realized something. This was the first time in years that he felt at peace. Keaton had erased Melissa and Sandra from his life, but he knew they were still out there, living in the ruins of their choices. Melissa, fading into obscurity, stuck in a job she hated, her looks no longer enough to save her. Sandra, struggling to hold on to a future that had slipped through her fingers, forced to work for every dollar she once took for granted. And Tyler? Gone. No one had heard from him in months. Rumors said he had left town, broke and beaten down, running from debts he could never pay. Keaton had won. But it wasn't just revenge that satisfied him. It was knowing that they finally understood what they had done. And that was enough. The man Keaton had once been, gone. The man he had become, stronger, unbreakable, untouchable. His career had skyrocketed, his new division was thriving, and his personal life was better than ever. Ivanka sat across from him at dinner, watching him carefully. "You seem lighter," she noted. Keaton smirked. "I think I finally let go." Ivanka's gaze softened. "Good, because you deserve more than a life spent looking back." For the first time in years, Keaton realized she was right. And as he reached for her hand, he felt something foreign settle inside him. Something he hadn't known in a long time. Happiness. Months later, Keaton received one final letter. The return address? Riverbank. Melissa's new home. He opened it, his eyes scanning the messy handwriting. "Keaton, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I destroyed it. I lost everything. And I have no one to blame but myself. Goodbye." Keaton stared at the letter for a long moment. Then, he burned it. Because Melissa Monroe no longer existed in his world. She had made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. And Keaton Monroe? He had won.